So, adventure time. I've been wanting to do this one for a while, not because I think it needs an introduction. If you're here, you probably already have a soft spot for it, but because the full story, told properly from the very beginning, is genuinely one of the most ambitious things any animated show has ever tried to do. And most people, myself included when I first watched it, only caught pieces of it. You watched it as a kid, drifted off somewhere around season 4 or 5, and then came back years later to find that the show had quietly built an entire mythology while you weren't looking. So that's what tonight is. The whole thing, start to finish. Every era, every character, every weird little lore detail I find interesting. We're covering the original show, all 10 seasons, plus the Distant Lands specials and the Fionna and Cake series. In total, that's something in the region of 297 episodes across 3 shows, plus a substantial chunk of the comics. I'm not going to cover every single one-off adventure because that would genuinely take weeks, but the story, the real connective tissue of it all, gets covered in full. A few practical notes before we start properly. This script is based on the 3 shows, the original series, Distant Lands, and Fionna and Cake, plus the comics and video games, treating them as canon where they don't contradict the shows. Where the comics conflict with the shows, I've flagged it. Where the lore is genuinely ambiguous, I've said so. Adventure Time has enough unresolved threads that anyone doing a comprehensive lore walkthrough has to make a few judgment calls, and I'd rather be transparent about that than pretend the mythology is more airtight than it is. One more thing. The show has about a dozen characters I could happily spend an entire separate video on. Tree trunks alone could fill an hour. The comics introduce hundreds of side characters with their own elaborate histories. I've tried to include everything that matters to the main story while acknowledging that there's always more. If you're missing something, it's either in a future video or it's in the comics, which I'll be covering separately. This is a slow one. No rush. There's a lot of ground to cover and the ground is genuinely fascinating, so I'm not going to skip through it. If you're settling in for the night, that's exactly the right energy for this. A quick note before we start. If you've never seen the show and want to, this will obviously spoil everything. But honestly, knowing the plot doesn't diminish Adventure Time the way it might with other shows. Half the joy is in the moment-to-moment weirdness, and the art and the performances. The lore is just the extra layer underneath all of that, right? Let's go back, way back. Further than you'd think a show about a boy and his dog would ever need to go. Before we meet Finn. Before we meet anyone. Before Earth even exists in any meaningful form. Adventure Time starts with this: nothing. And before there was nothing, there were monsters. I love that this is where the show begins, cosmologically. Not with a bang, not with a god of some kind. Just a handful of incomprehensibly ancient creatures who, in some random confluence of will and chaos, decide to create everything. The multiverse is born, more or less, because a few pre-nothingness monsters had a moment of creative impulse. It's a bit like the infinite monkeys with typewriters idea, but instead of Shakespeare, they wrote the entire fabric of existence. The multiverse, as Adventure Time understands it, works the way most multiverses do in fiction. A collection of separate dimensions, all connected under one larger structure. Some dimensions have permanent links between them, stable portals that allow travel. Some are linked temporarily by naturally forming wormholes, and some can be connected artificially, using items of significant magical power. That last category will become very relevant later. Now, 3 pre-nothingness monsters are worth naming right now because they all become enormously important down the line. The first is the Lich, described explicitly as the manifestation of evil itself. Not a creature that does evil things, but the actual embodiment of the concept. The second is Orgalorg, who goes by the title The Breaker of Worlds, which tells you everything you need to know about his ambitions. And the third is Cocanthi, an ancient beast revered for its extraordinary power. We'll come back to all 3 of them. At the center of the multiverse is something called the Time Room. It's the one dimension that exists outside of time entirely. Time waves emanate from it outward to all the other dimensions, rather than affecting it. It is, by most reasonable definitions, the most important place in the entire multiverse, and it's home to Prismo. Prismo is the Wishmaster, and he might be my favorite character in the whole show. He's technically a 2-dimensional entity,
He appears as a kind of flat, glowing shape. But what he actually is a dream projection. Somewhere in the time room, an old man is sleeping, has been sleeping for an unknown amount of time, and Prismo is the dream that old man is having. He exists as long as the old man sleeps. If the old man wakes up, Prismo disappears.
It's a detail that sounds absurd and then becomes heartbreaking later, so just file it away. His job, beyond granting wishes to anyone who successfully reaches the time room, which is not easy, is to make sure the dimensions of the multiverse remain stable. No unauthorized crossovers, no illegal dimensions being created, that sort of thing. He's enormously powerful, but he's also apparently subject to audits from a cosmic entity named Scarab, who reports to someone called Orbo, who in turn answers to an entity that nobody in the show ever names or describes. The hierarchy goes deeper than anyone is comfortable acknowledging. Prismo is also, in his own words, quite lonely, but he makes excellent pickles. Beyond Prismo, the multiverse is tended to by a handful of other cosmic entities, each responsible for something fundamental. Death, for instance, lives in the Land of the Dead, the waiting room for all souls. He resides in a castle of light and presides over 50 dead worlds,
each corresponding to a different quality of existence in death. The first dead world is not pleasant, the 50th is a kind of pure enlightenment, but at that level, you no longer remember anything from your previous life. The middle worlds are where you remain yourself, with your memories intact, just dead. Life handles reincarnation. She shapes souls like pottery and sends them into new bodies. The soul doesn't remember its previous life, but can maintain a loose connection to it under certain circumstances. The Cosmic Owl is responsible for dreams across the entire multiverse. When he appears in someone's dream, it becomes a premonition. The events of the dream will come true in some form. If he appears in a dream where the dreamer dies, it becomes what the show calls a croak dream, which is the multiverse's way of telling someone their death is coming. The Cosmic Owl and Prismo are close, actually.
Two rather isolated beings in their particular corners of existence, and there's something quietly lovely about that friendship. Then there's the Catalyst Comet, which is a bit harder to explain. Every 1,000 years or so, a comet hits Earth, and each one carries with it an agent of change, something that alters the course of the world for better or worse. Agents of change are reincarnated upon death, so they carry their purpose across multiple lifetimes. The Lich has been a Catalyst Comet before, bringing destruction. Finn has been one, bringing good. There are others we never fully learn about. The Party. God is exactly what it sounds like, the god of partying.
He's perpetually at a party. This ended his last relationship. He can also grant wishes in a limited capacity, which is a fun detail that gets used once or twice. Gulb is the last one worth mentioning here, and he's properly terrifying in a way most of the other cosmic entities aren't. He's the embodiment of chaos and disorder, and he lives in his own dimension of nothingness. The fact that the Lich, the literal manifestation of evil, considers Gulb worth revering says quite a lot. We won't see him for a long time, but when the show eventually gets there, it earns the build-up. There's also Chronologius Rex, the Lord of all time, who oversees something called the vanishing point, the center of all time. Any oath or promise made to all time is binding under his authority. Break it, and you're erased from history entirely. This detail comes back in a genuinely surprising way much later in the show, in an episode that I think is one of the most quietly clever things the series does. Alright, now we have the structure of the universe, let's get to the part where things start going wrong. Earth in the Adventure Time universe has 4 elements: fire, ice, candy, and slime, which is not that far off from Earth, wind, fire, and water, if you squint at it generously. There's also something called the anti-element, lumps, which originates in a completely separate dimension called lumpy space, but we'll get to that. What matters for now is that each element has a cosmic entity associated with it. Jan, the fire element, who is also the sun itself. Lon, the ice element. Arklak, the candy element. And Nigta, the slime element. The apostrophe in that name is doing a lot of work and I genuinely don't know how to pronounce it, so I'm going to move on. These 4 are responsible for the elemental balance of the world. Or they're supposed to be. The problem is that Jan, Arklak, and Nigta have a habit of destroying every creature that starts developing on Earth. Every time life begins to emerge, those 3 decide it should stop. Lon disagrees. She banishes the other 3 from Earth entirely. And then, in a gesture that is both noble and carries enormous consequences, she destroys herself to forge the Sword of Lon, the only weapon powerful enough to stop the 3 elemental entities if they ever return. The sword can only be wielded by someone described as a warrior who can withstand great bodily loss without injury. That's a specification that will come back around eventually.
The thing about ice elementals, though, and this is a pattern the show commits to across thousands of years of history, is that they always betray the other 3. Not because they're necessarily bad, it's just what the ice element does. The betrayal is baked in at a cosmic level. Lon's sacrifice was the right thing to do, but her successors will always find a way to go wrong. Now we're in the dinosaur age, and there are 4 elemental kingdoms, each ruled by the current holder of their element. Urgent Evergreen holds ice, Chatsbury holds candy, Balthus holds fire, Slimy D holds slime. These names are completely unhinged, and I love them. The world is divided into 4 quadrants, each kingdom ruling its own. Evergreen has a small dinosaur protege named Gunther. Gunther respects Evergreen enormously and dreams of having magical powers like his master.
Evergreen, for his part, stole Gunther's egg and mutated his brain to make him sentient, which is a fairly troubling start to a mentorship, but there we are. A green catalyst comet, the Lich, in one of his earliest forms, is heading toward Earth, and Evergreen, uniquely among the 4 elementals, recognizes it as different from previous comets, more destructive, the kind that could kill everything. The other 3 aren't worried, they'll just reincarnate, but Evergreen decides to take matters into his own hands. He builds a crown, a magical crown that grants a single wish to whoever wears it. To power it, he needs the ruby eyes of something called MacLeod the Lava Dog, which requires blinding a fire dog, which he does, with Gunther's help. The other elementals try to interfere, so Evergreen freezes them to keep them out of the way. Ice elemental betrayal, right on schedule. MacLeod tracks him back to his castle, manages to trap Evergreen under rubble. The crown is finished, but Evergreen is pinned, which means it's up to Gunther to wish the comet away. And Gunther, given the chance to reshape reality with a single thought, wishes not for the comet to vanish, but to become his master, to be what he admired most, a great, powerful ice wizard. The wish depletes the crown's wish-granting ability permanently. From this moment forward, it is simply the Ice Crown, and it bestows ice powers and complete consuming madness on anyone who wears it. Every person who ever puts it on will have their personality imprinted inside it, stored like data. Gunther is the first. He's immortalized inside that crown. The comet hits Earth, the 4 elementals die, and the Lich is planted in the planet, non-corporeally, where he will stay for a very long time. I think about Gunther a lot, honestly. He wasn't a bad person. He just idolized someone and given one perfect moment of power, could only imagine becoming his role model. It's not a grand villainous motive, it's just very human. Or, well, very dinosaur. But you know what I mean. The crown passes through history after this. Santa Claus, at some point, wore it. His personality is stored inside. A boy named Spain, probably in the Middle Ages, wore it once. Neither story is told in full. They're just there in the background, implied. Part of what makes the Ice Crown so melancholy is that it just keeps finding people who probably didn't deserve what it did to them. Fast forwarding considerably. Earth has 3 kinds of people dominating it now: humans, wizards, and vampires. The vampires came first, but went underground during an ice age and have been dormant ever since. The wizards formed their own secret society, Wizard City, originally built around the worship of Cocanthe, that pre-nothingness monster from the very beginning. The wizard cult drew power from Cocanthe and thrived on it. Then Cocanthe died for reasons the show never fully explains. The cult dissolved. The city was repurposed by new leadership who banned dark magic entirely, and Cocanthe's body was sealed in a chamber beneath the city to contain whatever residual power it might still have after death. The idea that something could be so powerful that even dying doesn't fully neutralize it is a detail I find genuinely unsettling. Just filed away under the foundations of a wizard school, waiting. Meanwhile, Mars. Mars has its own civilization, human-adjacent people, a functioning society, a ruler. The ruler is Abraham Lincoln, not through any conventional political process, through time travel and a bargain with death. Bear with me. Abraham Lincoln is born in 1809. He becomes the 16th president.
He's assassinated on the 14th of April, 1865, by John Wilkes Booth. Upon dying, he negotiates a deal with death, a deal that results in him being granted immortality and the position of King of Mars. The time travel component means this retroactively places him on Mars before he was even born. Adventure Time handles temporal paradox with admirable casualness. Two Martians worth knowing. Grog, Gob, Glob, Grod, who is four beings sharing one body and will eventually become the god of a religion in Ooo. And his brother Magic Man. Magic Man has a wife named Margles, and when Gulb, the embodiment of chaos, makes his first visit to Mars, Margles is simply erased from existence. Not killed, erased. Magic Man builds a defense system and names it Margles. Magical automatic resistance, generating laser energy supplier. It looks exactly like her. It goes immediately insane because he built it using his own nightmares and grief. He tries for years to get her back,
including asking Prismo directly for a wish. Wish magic has no effect on Gulb. There's nothing to be done. What Magic Man does instead of processing this loss in any healthy way is become absolutely insufferable to everyone around him. He terrorizes Mars for hundreds of years. Plagues, tricks, humiliations. Grog Gob Glob Grod eventually has him banished to Ooo as a punishment, but gives him a transporter home that can only be activated by someone who genuinely cares about another person. The joke being that Magic Man, who is profoundly disconnected from caring about anyone, is effectively trapped on Earth until he changes. He doesn't for a very long time. Orgalorg gets his own separate encounter around this period. He's the pre-nothingness monster we mentioned earlier, the breaker of worlds. A yellow catalyst comet is incoming, and Orgalorg wants to intercept it and consume its power. Abraham Lincoln tells Grog Gob Glob Grod to stop him. Orgalorg is cast down to Earth, his memories fully suppressed, and Earth's gravity, 9.8 meters per second squared, compresses his enormous ancient body into a small, harmless penguin. He says wank. He then proceeds to live among other creatures for thousands of years. He's present for ancient Egypt. He fights in the First World War. He briefly becomes a movie director. He is immortal and completely unaware of what he once was. The yellow comet does hit Earth, bringing an agent of change whose full identity isn't specified. The popular theory, based on some later context, is that this agent eventually becomes Jake, but the show is deliberately vague about it. The important thing is that Orgalorg is now a penguin, wandering through history, and that's where he'll stay for a very long time, a few decades before the modern day, before the war, before any of the chaos that defines the Land of Ooo. There's a man named Simon Petrikov, and he's a university lecturer who studies ancient magical artifacts. He believes in them. His colleagues think he's a bit of a crank, but he's been right often enough that he keeps going. He's catalogued objects like the Armor of Zeldran, the Wand of Disbursement, the Enchiridion. He knows they're real, he just has to prove it. One of his students is a woman named Betty Groff. She's a believer too, which is already unusual. Most people in his world find the whole thing embarrassing. Simon has plans to travel to Pakistan to search for the Enchiridion. Betty was heading to Australia, but cancels that trip entirely to go with him instead. They find it. On the way home, Betty insists that Simon take all the credit, that it was his achievement. He accepts, and that, in hindsight, is the first in a long series of sacrifices Betty makes for Simon that he doesn't fully register at the time. Their relationship deepens. They co-author a book together, Mystic Rituals and Their Space-Time Applications, a spell book filled with rituals that don't currently work because the world has too little magic in it. That detail will matter eventually. They fall in love, they become engaged. And then Simon finds the ice crown. He brings it home. He puts it on his head, as one does with a mysterious ancient artifact of unknown magical provenance. And just like that, Gunther's wish, baked into the crown for thousands of years, latches onto Simon. The crown sees in him what Gunther saw in Evergreen, someone to become, someone to consume. The transformation is slow at first. His skin goes blue, his hair grows out, turns white. Even without wearing the crown, his body begins to change. He can generate ice and cold, and the thing that makes this genuinely devastating to watch is that Simon knows what's happening. He's a scholar, he understands exactly what the crown is doing. He records himself on video, documenting the decline,
sometimes lucid, sometimes not, sometimes managing a few sentences before the madness creeps back in. Those video diaries are found by Finn and Jake 1,000 years later, and they're one of the best pieces of storytelling in the entire show. Betty is frightened. One day, she hides from him, just briefly ducks behind a corner when the crown does something that scares her. And in that exact moment, a portal opens in their flat. A portal caused by Simon himself, 1,000 years in the future, trying to find a way to apologize for everything that happened next. But it's past Betty who jumps through, not present Simon. She disappears into the future. Simon, in the present, doesn't know where she went. He thinks she ran away because of him, which is technically true, but not in the way he understands it. She ran away for him, to try to save him. The distinction matters enormously. He just never gets to know it. What follows is a slow erosion. Simon continues to document himself. He lectures less. He ventures out more with the crown on, because increasingly he feels the need to use it. Each use accelerates what's happening to him. He's caught somewhere between the person he was and the person the crown is turning him into. There are notes in his handwriting that become harder to follow. References to Betty, questions he can no longer answer clearly.
The videotapes he makes during this period are, when Finn and Jake eventually find them, genuinely haunting, not in a horror way, in the specific, quiet horror of watching someone smart document their own dissolution in real time while still lucid enough to know what's happening. There are moments on those tapes where Simon is clearly himself, speaking carefully about what he's losing and why he thinks it's happening. And then there are moments where the crown has taken over mid-sentence and he's raving about something entirely different. And then he comes back, briefly, and apologizes, and then it happens again.
It's the kind of storytelling that works specifically because the show spent seasons establishing who Ice King was before revealing who he used to be. You watch those tapes knowing the outcome. That knowledge is the weight that makes every lucid moment land. The book he co-authored with Betty, Mystic Rituals and their space-time applications, also becomes quietly significant later. The spells in it don't work in a low magic world. But the world will not always be low magic, and anyone who finds the book in a time when the spells actually function will have something quite powerful in their hands. By the time the Mushroom War arrives, Simon Petrikov is very nearly gone. The Great Mushroom War isn't shown in full detail in the show. We get glimpses, old photographs, ruins, the occasional piece of technology half buried under grass and candy. But the picture is clear enough. It's the end of human civilization. A conflict on a global scale that culminates in something, not a conventional nuclear warhead, but something hitting Earth with enough force to take a literal bite out of the planet. The big curve you can see at the bottom of the world in the show, that's where the chunk went. The fallout is extraordinary in the most literal sense. Most humans die. Those who don't are changed by the radiation. Some become oozers, a mutation that turns people into zombie-like green pus-leaking creatures that actually smell sounds.
I have written many scripts, and that sentence remains one of the stranger things I've typed. The oozers will show up periodically throughout the show as a general hazard of the wastelands. New species emerge from the mutation. Dimensional barriers weaken, and creatures from other dimensions start filtering in. The Raynorns, who fed on humans, find this an opportune moment, and the vampires, who have been dormant underground since the Ice Age, decide that the near extinction of their primary food source is somehow still a reasonable time to come back out. Bold strategy. The Lich finally becomes corporeal around this time. He's been dormant in the planet since the dinosaur age, slowly gathering power at a well of evil deep underground. 1,000 years of waiting, and now the world is broken enough for him to act. Right around the same time the Lich becomes corporeal, the blue catalyst comet hits Earth, the one carrying the embodiment of good.
It arrives as a flash of light, becomes a butterfly, and begins an extraordinarily long journey through reincarnation toward becoming Finn. We don't see that chain in full, we just know it begins here. Hugo, a scientist who'd been working with some of the surviving humans, gets them off the planet before the worst of it.
They're rescued by a species called the Greys, who merge their DNA with the humans. No more aging, pointy ears, more space-compatible bodies. This group ends up on a derelict space station called the Drift. Hugo, being Hugo, decides to rebuild it. His plan involves cannibalizing pieces from one part of the station to build a Unity pod in another part of the station, which is a bit like robbing one side of your house to renovate the other. His robot assistant Seago figures this out, raises the alarm, and gets scrapped as a result. Classic. Down on Earth, the automated infrastructure of the old world keeps ticking over. Superporp, a grape-flavoured fizzy drink company, never stopped. Their underground factory is fully automated and is still pushing cans into vending machines across what used to be North America. Mo, the robotics engineer who created a whole line of robots and lived in a factory below the surface, is still alive, still making his Mo series Robots. A comic book called Blee, which will become beloved reading material for both Finn and the Ice King 1,000 years from now, is still being distributed, but hasn't actually published a new issue in hundreds of years. The guard stationed outside the empty headquarters doesn't know yet. There's something oddly comforting about that, I think. The idea that certain things just keep going, regardless. A pop machine delivering cans to no one. A cartoon being distributed to an empty world. The universe doesn't wait for an audience. Mo, for his part, eventually sends his most beloved robot, Baymo, off to start a potato farm on Mars. Baymo doesn't make it to Mars, but we'll get there. Now let's talk about Marceline, because her story is one of the longest and richest in the show, and it begins here, in the wreckage of the world. Hunson Abadia is the Lord of Evil. He's the ruler of the Nightosphere, which is essentially hell, a place of demons, endless death, terrible conditions. Hunson, despite the title, isn't entirely a strategic villain. He just is what he is. He doesn't know where he comes from or whether he had parents. He killed the previous Lord of Evil to take the position. That's his whole origin. He came to Earth sometime before the Mushroom War, knocked up a woman named Elise, and had a daughter with her. That daughter is Marceline. She's half human, half demon, and the only unusual ability she has at birth is the ability to suck the soul out of a living creature, a trait inherited from her father. Besides that, she's functionally a normal child. Hunson had to return to the Nightosphere not long after she was born, and didn't exactly arrange custody visits across dimensional barriers. So Elise raises Marceline alone, and when the war happens, they survive it. They scavenge. Elise eventually dies. And Marceline, still young, still just a girl in the middle of an apocalypse, is on her own. And this is where Simon finds her. He's barely himself at this point. The crown has taken most of what made him Simon Petrikov. The scholar, the gentleman, the person who loved Betty. But there's still enough left that when he encounters a small half-demon child, alone in a destroyed city, he decides she needs looking after. He finds her a teddy bear, just one he comes across in the rubble, and she names it Hambo. She's had it for about 10 minutes, and it's already the most important object in her world. They travel together. Simon uses the crown to protect her from the horrors of the post-war landscape. Oozes, wild animals, dangerous creatures from the dimensional ruptures. But every time he uses it, he loses a little more of himself. He knows this. He uses it anyway. There's a lovely detail in this period where Marceline gets a fever, and Simon goes on this desperate, increasingly unhinged quest for chicken noodle soup, demolishing oozes, singing the Cheers theme song. He was a fan of the show, apparently, eventually being helped by something called the Mother Gum, a sentient pink sludge that's settled throughout the ruined city. He gets the soup. A few years pass. Marceline has grown up a little. Simon is barely there. He begins to recognize that he's running out of time, that soon there won't be enough of him left to make any decisions at all. He encounters a demon from the Nightosphere, figures out that Hunson Abadir is Marceline's father, and forms a plan. He'll send her to her father. He doesn't know if Hunson is a good father or wants her there, but the Nightosphere is safer than this. He opens a portal using their old spellbook. It actually works now, because the world is damaged enough that magic flows more freely. He casts a binding spell so that Hunson and Marceline will eventually meet. He gives Marceline a recording for Betty, photos of her mother, a tutorial on opening Nightosphere portals. He gives her Hambo to hold on to, and that's the last thing he does as Simon. His purpose, the one thing keeping him tethered to himself, is done. Marceline is as safe as he can make her. And so he succumbs. Fully and finally, he becomes the Ice King. I find this part genuinely difficult to just narrate flatly, because the show earns every beat of it. Simon is a good person who made one accidental mistake, putting on a crown, and it cost him everything.
His relationship, his mind, his identity. He doesn't even get to grieve properly because there's nothing left to grieve with. By the end, the Ice King doesn't know there was ever a Simon. He starts building his Ice Kingdom. He starts kidnapping princesses for reasons even he doesn't understand. He's looking for Betty. He just doesn't know it anymore. Those tapes survive in the Ice Kingdom for 1,000 years, and when Finn and Jake eventually find them, Marceline is there too, watching her adopted father's disappearance documented in his own hand.
The show doesn't answer what you do when someone you love is still alive, but entirely unreachable. It just asks. Marceline's path after leaving Simon is long and strange, and not always pleasant, which tracks for someone who grows up in a ruined world and is half demon and then accidentally becomes a vampire. We'll get to that. She finds some werewolves who help her summon Hunson Abadir to Earth. He arrives. He promptly sucks the souls from her werewolf companions, leaving their empty skin suits lying around. Not the ideal first impression from a father. She stays with him anyway, because the apocalypse, and because she wants information and protection. Hunson passes down the Abadir axe to her. It's either a family heirloom or something he specifically created, depending on which version you believe. And Marceline, being a musician at heart even at this age, immediately repurposes it as a bass guitar that also happens to be an axe. She never stops playing it.
It's one of those character details that the show never makes a big deal of, but it's always there. The Fry song. If you've seen the show, you know. If you haven't, Hunson Abadir, the Lord of Evil, ruler of the Nightosphere, eats Marceline's chips while she's making herself dinner. Her fries, the ones she made for herself. He just takes them, and this singular act of casual parental thoughtlessness becomes the defining grievance of her relationship with her father for the next 1,000 years, and also the inspiration for what might be the most emotionally effective 30-second musical number in the show. Why did he eat her fries? Why did he eat her fries? It's perfect. It's completely absurd, and it's perfect. She exiles him back to the Nightosphere after this, and then her unicorn gets killed by vampires. Fairly abrupt escalation. In retaliation, or maybe just in the absence of anything better to do, she decides to kill all the vampires. She gets very good at it. She works her way through the vampire court one by one. The Fool, the Empress, the Hierophant, the Moon. Each time she kills one, she absorbs their power using the soul-sucking ability she inherited from Hunson. She gains flight, invisibility, regeneration, shape-shifting. She becomes extraordinarily powerful. The only vampire remaining is the Vampire King. She encounters him on a boat full of humans trying to escape the mainland, wearing animal hats to protect their necks from vampire bites, which is a detail that pays off in a completely unexpected way much later in the show. She stakes the Vampire King. He bites her neck. Both things happen simultaneously. He becomes a purified lion. She becomes a vampire. One vampire left. That's Marceline. The title of Vampire Queen is mostly ceremonial since there are no other vampires, but she keeps it. The humans on that boat sail to a chain of small islands and begin building what will eventually be Founder's Island. More on that later. Marceline, now immortal, eventually encounters Princess Bubblegum. This is hundreds of years before the show begins. PB is young, relatively speaking. The Candy Kingdom is still being constructed, and Marceline is performing a concert. PB catches the shirt Marceline throws into the crowd. They fall in love. Their relationship is good for a while, genuinely good, but they're opposites in the way that matters. PB has a kingdom to build and a people to protect, and an overwhelming need to control outcomes. Marceline has a music career and 1,000 years of emotional scars and a deep resistance to being managed. They break up. Marceline writes and plays the breakup song in public, while PB is standing right there. It is, by any objective measure, a brutal way to end a relationship. The glass people of the nearby Glass Kingdom witness the whole thing and make Marceline a legend. PB keeps the shirt. She sleeps with it for so long that it absorbs a significant amount of emotional magic energy from her. That shirt will come up again much later. In a context nobody would expect. The humans who sailed away from the mainland during the vampire troubles found their way to a small archipelago and built a colony. Over the centuries, it became Founder's Island, a network of islands that reconstructed human society, advanced it significantly in terms of technology, and then did something humans have an unfortunate tendency to do: built walls and refused to let anyone in or out. Their isolationism is understandable if you think about it. The world outside had just tried very hard to kill them. They rebuilt something safe and stable, and they were not interested in external contamination. Anti-Hyder propaganda became a major part of civic life. The Great Mechanical Guardian, a massive robot stationed in the surrounding water, prevented anyone from leaving or arriving. If you tried to leave, the Guardian stopped you. If you tried to enter,
The Guardian stopped you. Every child born on Founders Island was assigned a role in society before they were old enough to choose one themselves. Teachers, healers, seekers. Seekers were the ones who retrieved anyone trying to escape. They were given cybernetic implants, controllable remotely in case a seeker ever wavered in their duty. Dr. Gross was the one who designed and fitted those implants, and who taught the seekers their craft. One seeker, worth knowing, Kara Strong, designation XJ77. She has a friend named Frida who grows increasingly desperate to leave the island. Kara knows this. When Frida finally attempts it, Kara's implant activates, forcing her to destroy Frida's escape boat. Frida goes to re-education. Kara, presumably, has to live with that. Martin Mertens is a con man on Founders Island. He sells fake escape plans to hiders, the people trying to leave, and then reports them to the authorities, getting paid from both sides. He's not a good person. He gets both his legs broken when a hider named Widow forces him to the beach, and Kara Strong mistakes him for a hider and acts accordingly. He ends up in hospital. In hospital, he meets Dr. Minerva Campbell. They fall in love. They have a child, Finn Mertens. A year later, Widow and some escaped hiders come looking for Martin. He takes baby Finn onto a small raft and tries to run, not necessarily intending to leave the island, just to escape the immediate threat. The Guardian doesn't distinguish. It attacks. Martin and Finn are separated in the water. Martin survives but is swept away from the island entirely. He'll eventually end up in space, but that's a long journey from here. Baby Finn floats on the raft all the way to what will become the Land of Ooo. He washes ashore with no memories of his parents, no awareness of where he came from, and an understandable but deeply buried fear of the ocean that will plague him for years. Dr. Gross, meanwhile, escapes the island eventually and sets up a laboratory in Ooo to continue her experiments on creatures. She's not a good person either. Most of the interesting characters in this section aren't particularly good people, which is sort of the show's quiet point about institutions built on fear. They tend to produce people shaped by fear.
Kara Strong eventually crashes into Ooo on a retrieval mission, loses all her memories, including her name, and joins a tribe of fishy-adjacent humans who live in an abandoned underground shopping mall. She takes on a new identity entirely. We'll meet her later when the show begins. The Founders Island arc, looked at from a distance, is a story about what happens when a traumatized community decides safety is the only thing that matters. The people there built something genuinely good: advanced technology, a stable society, people who are cared for and educated. They just also decided that the price of maintaining it was complete control. Every child assigned a role before they can choose. Implants that override free will. Anyone who wants to leave treated as a traitor. It's not monstrous, it's comprehensible. That's almost worse. The Mushroom War happened. The world outside was genuinely terrible. You can follow every step in their logic and still end up somewhere deeply wrong. Finn, when he eventually gets there, is the argument against all of it. And he didn't even know he was making one. The Mothergum is one of those details the show introduces quietly and then builds on slowly over many seasons. It's a sentient pinkish sludge, quasi-intelligent, vaguely responsive, that has been spreading through the ruins of the old world since the Mushroom War. And at some point, it produces Bonnibel. Bonnibel is the reincarnated candy elemental. She emerges from the Mothergum as a young woman and immediately begins applying her extraordinarily capable scientific mind to the world around her. She also has a brother, Nettie, produced by the same process, who is a highly chaotic little animal creature that spends most of his time suckled to a candy tree, absorbing its juice and secreting it.
He's not great company in a conventional sense, but the juice he produces will eventually power the entire Candy Kingdom, so he earns his keep. Bonnibel is lonely. She creates family: Uncle Gumbald, Aunt Lolly, cousin cheekily. She makes them from candy and life and her own creativity, and for a brief window, it's nice. And then Gumbald immediately starts scheming about building a full city of candy, which Bonnibel says no to, and Gumbald responds by brewing up a lobotomizing potion called Dum Dum Juice and planning to use it on her. Bonnibel, who is not someone you want working against you, turns it back on him. Gumbald becomes Punchy the Punch Bowl, Aunt Lolly becomes Manfred the Pinata, Cousin Cheekle becomes Crunchy the Cookie. 3 simplified, harmless candy people with no memory of who they were, wandering the emerging candy kingdom with big cheerful faces, aware of nothing.
Bonnibel learns something uncomfortable from this experience. Power over the simple-minded is very easy and rather comfortable, so she builds an entire kingdom that way. She creates candy people, harmless, cheerful, not too complicated. She crowns herself Princess Bubblegum. She surrounds the kingdom around Nettie's tree so his perpetual secretion can keep the lights on. She locks away the Mother Gum in a vault beneath the kingdom for safekeeping. The notable candy citizens are worth a quick tour. Peppermint Butler, her advisor and butler, smart enough to be genuinely dangerous, secretly practices dark magic, is on friendly personal terms with Death and Hunson Abadir. Nobody quite knows what to do about Peppermint Butler. He just keeps being useful. Lemongrab, PB's first real attempt at creating an heir. She intends him to be a vice ruler in case anything happens to her. He comes out screaming. He never quite stops. She sends him away with his own earldom to manage and tries to forget about him. Cinnamon Bun. Supposedly half-baked, which the show implies is literal. He is very, very stupid in a way that's almost endearing. He cannot be trusted with anything. He is given responsibility constantly. Root beer guy and cherry cream soda, created and immediately married, as if they came with the relationship pre-assigned. Starchy, the gravedigger, who moonlights as a radio host called The Graveyard Shift, and has conspiracy theories about almost everything. The Banana Guards, technically guards, practically a liability. A legion of robots called the Rattleballs, who were created to fight crime, got so good at it that they eliminated all crime, then began creating crime to justify their existence, and had to be decommissioned, all compressed into small cubes. One Rattlebot escaped to a junkyard and gave himself a name. We'll meet him later. And finally, perhaps most relevant for the story we're telling, PB builds the Gumball Guardians. 2 enormous gumball machine giants that protect the Candy Kingdom from existential threats. She powers them using a gem called Gemma. Gemma and her counterpart Carl, a red gem, are sentient rocks who were originally meteors. They've been separated for millennia. PB keeps Gemma. Carl ends up elsewhere. They spend a very long time apart. The Candy Kingdom is established. Princess Bubblegum is, by almost any reasonable measure, the most capable and powerful figure in what remains of the world. She's also a benevolent dictator who clones her citizens when they die and has surveillance on everything, and who created a family only to lobotomize them. But she genuinely loves her people. The show holds both of these things simultaneously and never fully resolves the tension between them. Joshua and Margaret are married dogs who run an investigation agency. They're doggy detectives in the most literal sense. Joshua and Margaret's investigation is the name of the business. Right on the door. They take cases. They solve them mostly. Their first case we know about is a poltergeist in their own office, which turns out to be caused by time slips from a future Finn and Jake trying to communicate with them through a creature called a clock bear that will end up in their attic. It's the kind of casually tangled temporal weirdness that Adventure Time treats as a Tuesday. They take other cases too. Tree Trunks reports that her apple pies are being stolen. Turns out it's her then-husband Wyatt stealing his own wife's pies. She tells him he could have just asked. Case closed. The mundane and the absurd sit right next to each other in these early stories, which is part of what makes them charming. The case that really matters, though, is Warren Ampersand. Warren Ampersand is a shape-shifting alien from a planet called Nara. He is the only inhabitant of Nara, and there's a reason for that. He keeps killing everyone else. His method is specific and horrible. He travels to other planets, grooms a child from a distance, impregnates a host to father a son who will inherit his shape-shifting powers. He then lures that son to Nara, shapeshifts the entire planet into a fake city, builds a whole fabricated reality to gain the son's trust, and then drains the shape-shifting energy out of the son via a special belt and kills him. Then he does it again when he gets old. He's been alive an extremely long time. Warren shows up in Joshua and Margaret's case. He impregnates Joshua on the top of his head, briefly against his will, and leaves. Sometime later, in circumstances that are as strange as they sound, a puppy emerges from the bump on Joshua's head. And separately, Margaret gives birth to a puppy from a more conventional arrangement. The puppy from Joshua, the one with Warren Ampersand's shape-shifting genetics, is named Jake. The puppy from Margaret is named Germain, just a regular dog. They also adopt a third child, Garter, whose story involves a portal in her mouth and a magic queen, and who eventually sacrifices herself in a way that erases her from the family's memory twice. Garter gets a rough deal. Joshua and Margaret later find baby Finn stuck to a leaf outside, held there by his own adhesive. They initially mistake him for a mudfish. They call him Finn. They adopt him and raise him alongside the dogs. Joshua is an experienced demon hunter and a naturally adventurous soul. He inspires Finn and Jake enormously. He designs elaborate dungeons for them to test themselves against when they're old enough. He leaves treasures in them, including the demon blood sword, which he forged from the blood of a demon rival named Keth in an elaborate and frankly unnecessarily complicated plan. He loves them. He raises them well, with the obvious exception of teaching Jake to pickpocket. Jake leaves home as a young adult, becomes a minor criminal, purse theft, the occasional bike jacking, eventually running a small gang, and then falls in love with Card Wars, a holographic card game which ends his criminal career. He meets Lady Rainicorn at a tournament. Lady is a Rainicorn from the Crystal Dimension, where dogs and Rainicorns have been at war for centuries. Lady's father, Bob, is a veteran of that war who loves dogs anyway, having been saved by one. Jake and Lady fall in love. He learns Korean to talk to her. It's one of the gentler love stories in the show, actually. No drama, they just like each other. Joshua and Margaret die at some point. The show never tells us how. Jermaine takes over their house and their collection of demon artifacts. He's fine, he's just a regular dog doing regular dog things, perpetually resetting a haunted Teddy Ruxpin equivalent to keep a demon at bay. Baby Finn, now growing up in the treehouse on the hill, is going to become the greatest hero the Land of Ooo has ever seen. But first, he has to be 12. The Land of Ooo is what remains of what used to be North America. It's not large by any historical standard, a few hundred miles of post-apocalyptic landscape that over the last 1,000 years has become densely, chaotically populated with kingdoms, creatures, weird biomes, and the accumulated strangeness of a world where magic came back and evolution had a field day. As far as most people in Ooo know, it's the whole world. History before the Mushroom War has been essentially lost. There are ruins of the old world everywhere. Old technology, old buildings, old infrastructure. But what it all meant is gone. The people of Ooo have no context for a world that wasn't like theirs. Finn is 12 or 13 when the show begins. Jake is an adult dog. Dogs age faster than humans, and Jake will outlive his non-magic years more quickly, but for now they're functionally peers. Together they're the acknowledged greatest heroes in the land. Princess Bubblegum gives them quests. Other citizens give them smaller ones. They do it all with enormous enthusiasm and very little caution. Princess Bubblegum runs the Candy Kingdom with absolute authority and genuine love for her people, and a security apparatus that monitors everything. She's the most trusted and respected figure in Ooo. She's also quietly a 1,000-year-old candy scientist who once turned her own family into lobotomized sweets to maintain control, and who recreates dead citizens from scratch and decides which ones are worth bringing back. The show never asks you to stop loving her, it just asks you to see all of it. The Ice King, Simon in his fully consumed form, is the recurring antagonist in the early seasons. He kidnaps princesses, he bothers everyone. He's pathetic in the specific way that makes him kind of sad rather than threatening. What Finn and Jake don't know yet, and what the show reveals gradually, is that he was once a brilliant and kind man, and that the penguin he calls Gunter, his favourite, the one he fawns over constantly, is actually the compressed form of Orgalorg, an immortal, pre-nothingness monster whose suppressed memories occasionally make Gunter do unsettling things. The Ice Kingdom is built deep in the frozen north. Hidden somewhere in its depths, unknown to the Ice King, is Patience Aunt Pym, the ice elemental who froze herself before the war to survive into a more magical future. She's been in there the whole time. Baymo arrives at some point early in the show, having been found in space by a decommissioned service robot on the Drift. Having helped resolve the situation with Hugo and the Unity Pod,
and having crash-landed outside Finn and Jake's treehouse, he moves in. The household then consists of Finn, Jake, Baymo, Shelby, the worm who lives in Jake's viola and is apparently an ordained priest, and Neptor, a pie-throwing robot Finn built who got accidentally struck sentient by lightning. Neptor was struck a second time by the Ice King, which gave him enhanced pie-throwing ability and also princess kidnapping tendencies, and which technically makes him Ice King's half-son. The shared custody situation is not formally arranged. Lady Rainicorn is a constant presence. She and Finn become genuinely good friends. Jake spends time with both of them, and they end up naturally close. Marceline, who technically still owns the treehouse, but has been asleep for hundreds of years and lost track, shows up at some point and tries to evict them. Finn hits her, she lets them stay. They become friends, which is how most people handle being punched by Finn, apparently. She builds a home in the nearby cave. The world around all of this is layered and vast. Dozens of kingdoms, each with a princess. The Slime Kingdom, the Fire Kingdom, the Ice Kingdom, the Grasslands, the Badlands, the Hot Dog Kingdom. Lumpy Space, which is technically a separate dimension, but whose princess, LSP, has decided to live in Ooo regardless because she got into an argument with her parents. There's a ghost princess who's forgotten how she died, a tree that turns people into something depending on the season, a labyrinth with a wish granter at the centre. Adventure Time's Ooo is extraordinarily dense with story, and the show spent a decade adding to it. Early in the show, Princess Bubblegum sends Finn and Jake to retrieve the Enchiridion from Mount Crador. This is the Great Hero's Handbook, the spellbook Simon once looked for as an antiquarian. It contains guidance for heroes, how to be better at the job, and has a few slots on its cover for gems of power, though the significance of that isn't known to most people. Finn passes a series of trials to prove himself worthy, and retrieves it from the Manistnish man at the summit. He keeps it at the treehouse.
It'll come up again, in much higher stakes circumstances. Around this time, the show introduces Ricardio. The Ice King, in one of his more passive moments, accidentally makes his own heart sentient. The heart promptly leaps out of his chest, gives itself a name, develops an extremely unsettling fixation on Princess Bubblegum, and journeys to the Candy Kingdom on its own to steal her heart for kissing purposes. It's genuinely disturbing in a way that's hard to fully articulate. The animation style, the overly expressive face on what is functionally just a heart with limbs, the helplessness of the situation. Finn defeats it eventually. Ricardio is compressed and returned. Ice King gets his heart back. He promises this is the last we'll see of Ricardio. It is not. Finn and Jake eventually meet Billy, the greatest hero Ooo has ever produced. His reputation precedes him significantly. He fought monsters, he stopped injustice, he once faced the Lich and, rather than killing him, which turned out to be impossible, froze him in amber deep inside the Candy Kingdom. He's a legend. When they find him, he's not quite what they expected. He's old, he's stopped adventuring, he's deeply disillusioned, convinced that fighting isn't the answer to anything, and that pacifism is the only moral path. He briefly persuades Finn and Jake to adopt this philosophy, which goes terribly, because Ooo does require occasional heroic violence to function. The show's thesis here is fairly blunt. Billy is projecting his own guilt and fatigue onto a philosophy that doesn't really hold. Finn and Jake figure this out. Billy matters beyond the one story, though. He has a girlfriend named Canyon, a woman with water powers. He has a nose that, in a detail that becomes plot significant much later, is made of some kind of gem. He's a legend, and legends in Adventure Time always come with weight. The Lich's return is handled with quiet patience by the show. Throughout the early seasons, there's just a snail, a small, ordinary-looking snail that shows up in almost every episode, just present in the background. Most viewers miss it for years, and then one episode reveals it. That snail is possessed by the Lich. He escaped the Amber prison. He's been watching. He's been waiting. He possesses the snail releases him fully, and he heads for his well of evil to restore his power. Princess Bubblegum gives Finn Billy's gauntlet, one of the only known weapons capable of hurting the Lich, and a knitted sweater for additional protection. The sweater becomes improbably central to the battle in a way that actually works emotionally. The Lich is defeated temporarily. PB is then killed and possessed by him in a subsequent escalation. Finn, Jake, and the Ice King, accidentally useful, destroy her body. She's rebuilt from available candy, but there isn't enough, and she comes back as a 13-year-old. Candy Kingdom law is specific. A ruler who isn't of age cannot rule. The Earl of Lemongrab assumes the princess role. He becomes, immediately, a dictator. The candy people begin making their own sacrifices, amalgamating candy from themselves to rebuild PB to the proper age. Plus a kiss from Finn because the show wants that moment to mean something. She comes back, Lemongrab is removed, everything returns to the status quo, more or less. Finn is in love with PB through all of this, genuinely, earnestly, completely. She's aware of it and mostly handles it kindly, though she occasionally uses it in ways that are, at best, tactless. He's 12 and she's 1,000 years old, and she has a kingdom to ruin. The gap in context between them is not small. His attention is about to be pulled somewhere else entirely, somewhere considerably hotter.
There are a few other early adventures worth mentioning briefly. Finn obtains the armour of Zeldrin, the same armour that Simon once searched for as an antiquarian, now passed through history to this point. They encounter some frozen human businessmen who washed ashore and thawed from mushroom war ice, the first non-Finn humans anyone in Ooo has seen in centuries. Yet Finn is barely fazed by it, which says something interesting about how he processes information about his own identity at this stage. He's been told he's the last human for so long that new evidence barely registers. They encounter Magic Man's casual cruelty in the field a few times. He turns Finn into a giant foot on one occasion, which seems like an overreaction to being given some sugar, but Magic Man has never needed proportionate responses to anything. The Enchiridion, meanwhile, gets briefly used as a pillow by Baymo while he's experimenting with things around the treehouse, and ends up in various misadventures before its role as a dimensional key becomes important. For something that was framed as enormously powerful and significant on first appearance, it spends a lot of time just being around, which is very much the show's sense of humour about epic objects. Flame Princess has been in a lantern above her father's throne since she was a child. The Flame King is the ruler of the Fire Kingdom, a man who got there by killing every member of his own family in succession for the crown. He heard a prophecy that his daughter would become more powerful than him and overthrow him. His response to this prophecy was to imprison her and attempt to have her killed, which is one approach. It didn't work. She burned down everything that tried to contain her, was eventually picked up by a Flame King squire who felt bad for her, and is finally given to a lumberjack before PB intervenes and brings her back to the Fire Kingdom, where the Flame King locks her in the lantern permanently. PB's concern about Flame Princess isn't cruelty, it's pragmatic. She genuinely believes that if FP ever enters a romantic relationship, her emotional instability combined with her powers could burn the world down. She shares this information with Jake, who shares it with Finn, who treats it as a challenge rather than a warning. They meet. They like each other immediately.
Finn is 13 and terrified and overthinking everything, which is developmentally appropriate when you're falling for someone who is literally made of fire and is functionally a minor deity in terms of raw power. Jake tries to put the brakes on the whole thing. Finn overrides him. They go through a phase of playing emotional mind games with each other that the show presents as both sweet and slightly chaotic. Two teenagers who don't quite know how to just say what they feel, circling around it instead. Eventually they start actually dating. It goes well for a while, in a they're clearly into each other, but also fire might kill them sort of way. The prophesied world-ending kiss does happen. She destabilizes. They spiral into the earth. Jake saves them both by removing oxygen from their burrow, extinguishing FP long enough to stabilize her. Everyone is fine, barely. The breakup comes later, and it comes from Finn's fault rather than hers.
He's having prophetic dreams about her, dreams with the cosmic owl in them, which makes them significant, though he doesn't understand the full message. Under Jake's guidance, he starts manufacturing a fake rivalry between FP and the Ice King to keep having the dreams and understand them better. FP finds out. She ends things. Ice King is suddenly homeless and moves into the treehouse. What happens after, though, is one of the more satisfying political arcs in the show. PB had been secretly using a machine to test FP's emotional stability, believing FP to be an ongoing risk to Ooo. Cinnamon Bun, who cannot be trusted with anything, as previously established, lets FP out of the testing facility against explicit instructions. FP learns that it was PB who originally advised her father to imprison her. she stages a coup. She overthrows the Flame King, locks him in his own lantern, becomes king of the Fire Kingdom, and immediately passes a law making lying illegal. The Fire Kingdom, historically a cruel and lawless place, becomes a genuinely better governed territory under her leadership. Cinnamon Bun, who takes a fireball to the face in the process, emerges from the ordeal with his brain apparently fully baked. He becomes a completely functional, intelligent knight and her loyal protector. The Flame King, not done, arranges a deal with a donkey duke named Don John to stage a counter coup in exchange for FP's hand in marriage. This fails, both of them get arrested, FP continues ruling. The Lemongrab arc is one of those things Adventure Time does where it starts as comedy and slowly, without you quite noticing, becomes something genuinely uncomfortable, and then wraps in a way that's both funny and kind of sad, and you're left uncertain how you feel about the whole thing. It begins simply enough. PB creates Lemongrab as an heir, a candy person designed to take over the Candy Kingdom if anything should happen to her. He comes out of the vat screaming and never really stops. He's tall, lemon yellow, with a head shaped like a lemon and the emotional regulation of someone who has never been told no.
He rules a small earldom of his own, and from the moment he arrives, it's clear that he is not particularly equipped for governance. He and a clone of himself, Lemongrab 2, are given joint rule over the earldom. This goes about as well as you'd expect from two identical entities with no emotional intelligence sharing power. They fight. They create their own candy-adjacent subjects, the lemon people, using a recipe for creating life that PB accidentally leaves behind. The lemons multiply. They're all screaming. They're starving because Lemongrab keeps creating new lemon people, instead of feeding the ones already there. The biggest of the lemon people, Lemon John, is so large that his body fills multiple rooms of the castle. It's chaos in a very specific, lemon-scented way. Into this mess arrives Lemon Hope, a lemon child who is somehow comparatively normal. He plays the harp. He isn't screaming constantly. PB wants him to grow up, learn to lead, and eventually liberate the earldom from the Lemongrabs. Lemon Hope's reaction to this is honestly quite relatable. He doesn't want that. He just wants freedom. He escapes the earldom, sets off into the world, and discovers that freedom is genuinely wonderful, and he doesn't owe the lemon people anything, and he's going to be just fine. His journey is one of those small Adventure Time arcs that doesn't get talked about much, but is quietly very good. He almost dies a few times. He sleeps wrapped in a blanket of rats for warmth. He encounters what's very probably PB in disguise as a mysterious flannel-wearing figure. He grows. He decides eventually to go back, but not out of obligation. Only because the nightmares about the lemons won't stop. He returns, plays his harp music for Lemongrab 1, which should kill him. The music is that beautiful and that lethal to his particular physiology. Lemongrab 1 had eaten Lemongrab 2 at this point because the relationship deteriorated that far. The half-digested Lemongrab 2 pulls out the earplugs protecting Lemongrab 1 from inside him. He explodes. The lemons are free. PB, who never quite leaves well enough alone, reconstructs the two Lemongrabs as Lemongrab 3, spliced together, brain slightly adjusted. He is calm, he is manageable, he is also quite depressed, which the show treats as an improvement, which says something about what the standard was before. He eventually disassembles a cult called Matthew that was living in the earldom, which seems to help his mood. Lemon Hope, having done his duty, walks away. He says he'll return in 1,000 years.
The show, because it commits to its promises, does eventually show him coming back in the far future sections. He finds the earldom abandoned. He sleeps in his perfectly clean room. The harp is still there. The thing about the Lich is that he's patient. That's what makes him work as a villain. He doesn't rush. He waits in a possessed snail for however long he needs to wait, watching, rebuilding his power, calculating, and when the moment comes, he moves quickly. He finds Billy's cave, Billy's crack, as it's actually called, which I think says something about the show's relationship with naming conventions. He kills Billy, actually kills him, not just defeats him. The greatest hero Ooo has ever known, gone. The Lich takes his body, specifically his skin, and wears it because the Lich is committed to being as frightening as possible at all times. In Billy's skin, he finds Finn and Jake. He tells them he's learned that the gems of power, collected together and placed in the Enchiridion, can stop the Lich forever. Finn and Jake are so glad to see their hero that they don't question this at all. They immediately begin gathering the gems from all the princess crowns across Ooo. By the time the Gumball Guardians blast the Lich in Billy to reveal the truth, he already has the gems. He inserts them into the Enchiridion. Finn destroys it, and the destruction of the Enchiridion, rather than closing the portal, opens one, directly to the Time Room. The Time Room. I find this section of the show genuinely wonderful. Prismo is delightful. He has his pickles. He has his wall of dimensional TV screens. He's clearly been waiting for something interesting to happen. The Lich arrives first and gets his wish, the extermination of all life. Prismo can't deny a valid wish. It happens. A dimension where everything alive is instantly reduced to bone. Finn and Jake are in the Time Room, unaffected. Finn wishes the Lich had never existed, which creates a new dimension, Farm World. In Farm World, no Lich, no Mushroom War. Simon Petrikov used his ice powers to stop the mutagenic bomb and died doing it. Marceline never became a vampire. A regular, pointy-nosed version of Finn lives there with his human parents and a normal Jake. The world is mostly intact. It sounds better than the original, honestly. It goes wrong fast. Finn gets the ice crown, uses it to defend his village, the mutagenic bomb explodes, the Lich possesses Jake. Finn has effectively undone his own wish. He's marooned in a dimension that's now arguably worse than the one he left. Jake is left in the Time Room. He has to make a wish. The Cosmic Owl is watching. Prismo, who genuinely likes Jake, holds his hand through it without technically breaking any rules.
Jake, in extremely high-pressure circumstances, wishes for a sandwich. Which is the second time he's done this in a life-or-death situation, and Prismo's expression in this moment is all anyone needs to understand what's happening. What they land on, with Prismo's gentle guidance, changes the Lich's wish to sending Finn and Jake home. The Lich wastes his one wish. He's stuck in the Time Room, powerless. Prismo notes, and this is a detail the show returns to, that the Farm World and the Extermination World, created by those wishes, still exist. They shouldn't, but they do. Prismo gives Jake a jar of his famous pickles with an invitation to hang out sometime. This is not a throwaway gesture. It will save both of their lives. And just like that, they're home in Ooo. The gems return to their owners. The Enchiridion is gone. Jake made a half-decent save. Everyone is alive. The Lich sits in the Time Room and waits.
Lady Rainicorn's pregnancy becomes known not long after the Time Room adventure. By the end of the first day following their birth, the pups are already more capable than their father. The mixed genetics of Rainicorn, Dog, and Shapeshifter makes for rapid development. There are 5 of them: Charlie, Viola, TV, Kim Kil-wan, and Jake Jr., who is a girl, something the show notes mildly and moves on from. Their mixed DNA means they age fast, and the show checks in on them periodically across many seasons as they grow into genuinely distinct people. Kim Kil-wan becomes a real estate developer. He's serious, slightly disapproving of his father's lifestyle, and ultimately just wants Jake to grow up. He buys the deed to the treehouse from Marceline. She technically still owns it, and rents it out to try and force Jake to get a job. Jake refuses to engage with any of this. Kim Kil-wan eventually gifts them the deed, because you can't make someone mature by purchasing their house back. Charlie becomes a tarot reader. She's genuinely good at it. At some point, she does a rare, turbo-boosted personal reading on herself, and sees her own future with uncomfortable clarity, including Jake choking on a sandwich in her 20s and having a child of her own named Gibbon in her 30s. She sees herself age and gradually makes peace with it. That's a quiet arc for a character who only appears a handful of times. TV stays home, lives on his computer, eats the crystal mergence of destruction, which he finds while exploring. Lady gets it back eventually. He moves to the crystal dimension for independence, and then immediately returns to live with his grandparents. Viola becomes an actress.
Jake Jr. eventually reconnects with Jake's old criminal gang and stages a kidnapping to impress him, which does not work. Jake, for his part, becomes an absent father without any real intention of being one. He just never grows up. He's constitutionally incapable of it, which the show treats with a combination of affection and mild frustration. He and Finn keep adventuring. The kids grow up mostly without him, He tries to make up for it intermittently. It's one of the few places the show is gently critical of Jake rather than just celebrating him. He's loving, he's funny, he's good in a crisis, and genuinely wise when he chooses to be.
But fatherhood requires showing up consistently, and Jake finds consistent presence difficult when there's something more immediately interesting happening. The irony is that his own father Joshua was the opposite. Intensely present, rigorous, building dungeons to train his kids. Jake inherited the adventurousness and the warmth, but not the discipline. His children turned out fine, mostly because of their own extraordinary genetics, and because Lady Rainicorn is an excellent parent. That's probably enough. But the show doesn't pretend it's the same as Jake being there. Quick detour to explain the Citadel before we go further. Constellation Billy, Billy's ghost, formed from the stars, tells Finn that his father is alive in the Citadel, a multiverse-wide maximum security prison held in its own dimension. Crystal cells, unconscious prisoners, the worst criminals in the entire multiverse, frozen in place. To gain entry, you need to have committed a cosmic crime, which means killing a cosmic entity. Prismo allows them to stage his temporary death. The Lich, still in the time room, ruins this by actually waking up and destroying the old man, which kills Prismo for real. The Lich is arrested and sent to the Citadel. Finn and Jake follow through the portal. Martin doesn't know who Finn is. His memory is gone or suppressed. The show is deliberately vague about how much is amnesia versus avoidance. He's been in that crystal cell for years, and the man who loved Minerva and brought Finn onto that raft seems very far away from who he is now. He escapes with the other freed prisoners. Finn grabs onto his ship. The grass sword curse takes over, pulls desperately to help him hold on, and rips his arm clean off. It blooms into a flower. The Lich, meanwhile, is reduced to a baby by the Citadel Guardian's healing blood. All the way back. An innocent child with no memory of what he was. He and Finn return to Ooo. Tree Trunks and Mr. Pig, the extremely unlikely couple who nonetheless work somehow, find him on their doorstep and name him Sweet Pea. Prismo's resurrection is one of the more complicated episodes of the show, and I mean that affectionately. It involves two simultaneous Jakes, a loop of time, Prismo's own backup plan involving the pickle jar he gave Jake, and a past iteration of Jake permanently sleeping in the time room as the old man body needed to keep Prismo existing. An iteration of Finn gets compressed into a sword in the process, the Finn sword, a blue gem with a version of Finn inside it that can occasionally communicate with the real one. Prismo is alive. Finn has a new sword. The baby Lich is eating apple pies at Tree Trunk's house. The universe keeps moving. Bella Noche is an interdimensional anti-magic entity that gets summoned by a group of Wizard City's more questionable faculty members. She strips magic from everyone in range, which is fine in a temporary problem sort of way, except for Ice King. The Ice Crown's magic is keeping him alive. Without it, Simon Petrikov reappears, and he's dying. Marceline sees him for the first time in 1,000 years. He's coherent, he knows her, he is, briefly, himself. His one wish before it ends is to find a way to apologize to Betty for everything. Using their old spellbook and Hambo, which PB traded her shirt for as a gift to Marceline, they open a portal to the moment just before Betty vanished. Simon apologizes across 1,000 years. And past Betty, seeing this, jumps through the portal to the present. She arrives in modern Ooo. She is, to put it charitably, extremely quick to adapt to a 1,000-year future. The show skips over any adjustment period almost entirely. She sees Simon, who is now the Ice King again because magic was restored, and she resolves immediately to cure him. This is going to define the rest of her life. Betty's approach to curing the crown's curse becomes increasingly extreme over time. She studies magic obsessively. She makes a deal with Magic Man, helping him build a device to transfer his powers to her in exchange for what she needs. The device half completes. Betty gains his magic and becomes somewhat unhinged, which is not a surprise given the circumstances, though it's still a little painful to watch. Magic Man becomes Normal Man, just an ordinary human, stripped of his powers. He's oddly better for it. He becomes Kingman of Mars eventually, which is a genuine redemption arc for someone who spent centuries being catastrophically unpleasant. Betty tries reprogramming the crown from inside it. She enters it with PB and Marceline via PB's science, and they see all the stored personalities, Gunther, Santa, Spain, and Simon. She finds a constructed version of herself inside,
and the constructed version stops sabotaging the crown when it falls in love with the constructed Simon. The crown stabilizes. Real Betty gets ejected. Simon is still Ice King. No progress. She kidnaps Gunter at one point to lure Ice King to her. She tries summoning Gulb directly. She goes partially mad from the magic she absorbed. Through all of it, she keeps searching for the solution that doesn't exist. Glob's sacrifice. Flying into Martin's incoming spaceship to protect Mars, thinking it's the approaching Catalyst comet, leaves his 4 disembodied heads floating in space. Betty gets her hands on his trapezoid helmet and develops her MMS theory. Magic, madness, and sadness are interconnected in all magic wielders, existing in proportions that vary by person. She's trying to map the relationship. It's genuinely interesting science in a context where the science is completely unhinged. Normal Man eventually retrieves Glob's heads, earns the position of Kingman, and begins a reign that is, from all accounts, actually decent. He has Tiny Manticore with him, the tiny creature who was his hostage for years and who finally turned on him, then forgave him. Their dynamic is one of those small things that work surprisingly well. And Betty keeps searching. She will keep searching until the very end. And when the end comes, it will be on her terms, in a way that costs everything and also, finally, gives Simon exactly what she always wanted for him. But that's a while away yet. This is the arc that finally, properly, gets into Marceline's history with the vampires. She's been a vampire for close to 1,000 years at this point, immortal, powerful, genuinely fine with it most of the time. But PB has built a machine that can extract the vampirism from her entirely.
They're living together, not officially back together, but something like it, careful and close. And PB offers it. Marceline considers. She agrees to try. The extraction works. The vampiric essence is pulled out of her, and then immediately, because nothing in Adventure Time resolves cleanly on the first attempt, the extracted essence becomes a dark cloud that reforms into the vampire court. The same 4 vampires Marceline killed 1,000 years ago. The Fool, the Empress, the Hierophant, and the Moon. They're back. New bodies, original personalities. The hunt that follows is a small contained mini-series, and it's one of my favourite stretches of the whole show. Each vampire represents a specific power that Marceline absorbed when she killed them, and as each one is taken out again, Marceline reabsorbs their power and becomes her full vampire self again, incrementally. The Empress is particularly unsettling. She goes to the Ice King and, in the show's words, tells him to submit. Ice King apparently has no complaints about this. That specific scene asks more questions about the crown than it answers. The Vampire King is different. He doesn't fight. He lets them find him, faces Marceline, and voluntarily allows them to extract his essence rather than making her kill him again. He's tired, honestly, done with being what he is.
The extraction works, but the removed vampiric essence becomes one final death cloud that tries to destroy Ooo anyway. Because even the Vampire King's best intentions produce dangerous byproducts, apparently. Marceline kills the cloud, she becomes a vampire again in the process. So they're exactly where they started. Marceline is a vampire. The Vampire King exists as a purified, essentially harmless lion somewhere in Ooo. PB's machine is in pieces. No cure was found. The only thing that's different is that Marceline and PB are noticeably closer at the end of it. Something quiet and careful about the way they look at each other now, like they've both stopped pretending there isn't something there. The show doesn't rush this, it lets it exist at the edges of other stories for a while longer. The Candy Kingdom has other issues to attend to. PB usurps her role back from whoever was holding it in her absence. The Earwax Man who positioned himself as the King of Ooo gets melted by Crunchy, pushing him into a fire, which is both justice and extremely funny. PB is back in charge. Next up, much larger problems. There's a quieter thread worth noting in how PB and Marceline handle everything after the vampire arc. They've been orbiting each other carefully for most of the show. The history between them is always present, the breakup still sitting there in the background, but neither of them has been willing to name what's clearly still there. The vampire arc changes something. They've just spent an intensely stressful period in close quarters working towards something together, and the care they show each other throughout it is impossible to ignore. PB trading her emotionally significant shirt for Hambo at the beginning of all this was a gesture Marceline didn't forget. little things accumulate. It's also worth pausing briefly on what the vampire arc does for Marceline as a character in her own right. She's been immortal for nearly 1,000 years. She made peace with being a vampire long before the show began. The decision to even try the cure is genuinely significant. It's a choice that requires admitting she might want something different, which isn't easy for someone whose whole identity is built on being fine with what she is. It doesn't work out.
She's back where she started, powers restored, the vampire queen in full. But she tried, and the show honours that without making a big speech about it. Patient St. Pim has been frozen in the Ice Kingdom for the entire length of the show. She froze herself before the Mushroom War to survive into a more magical future. She waited out 1,000 years of Ice King blissfully unaware she was there, and now the world is magical enough, and she thaws. She's the Ice Elemental, the current holder of the same elemental line that gave us Lon and Evergreen. And she has a plan. She wants to restore the 4 elemental quadrants of ancient times, split Ooo back into fire, ice, candy, and slime territories, each ruled by its elemental bearer, the way the world was in the dinosaur age before everything went wrong. She approaches the 3 other current elemental bearers, Princess Bubblegum, Candy, Flame Princess, Fire, and Slime Princess, Slime. None of them know they're elemental bearers. St. Pim explains the situation. FP and Slime Princess take to their powers naturally. PB struggles. She's a scientist who doesn't believe in magic even as she wields it, and the Candy elemental powers don't respond easily to someone who intellectually resists them. The purification spell requires a massive magical power source. Betty, who is deep in her research phase and has absorbed a significant amount of magic, ends up at the Ice Kingdom on the same day St. Pim needs her. St. Pim freezes Betty and uses her as a battery. The spell activates. Ooo is divided. Everything in each quadrant becomes its element. In the Candy Kingdom, all beings are permanently elated. Sugar-high happiness, no variation, no depth. The Fire Kingdom operates on pure rage. The Ice Kingdom is profound, immobilizing sadness. The Slime Kingdom is party-ish. The elemental bearers don't really govern so much as embody. They sit in their kingdoms and radiate their element outward, transforming everything in range. Finn, Jake, and Baymo return from a sea voyage to find their home completely unrecognizable. The treehouse is now Candy. Jake gets absorbed into the Slime Princess collective and effectively ceases to be Jake for a while. Sweet Pea, the baby, Lich, is completely unaffected. Being the Lich, no elemental purification can touch him. He wanders around looking confused. Finn travels through each quadrant trying to retrieve the gems from each elemental's crown, the idea being that combining the gems with the Ice King's crown might reverse the spell. He succeeds mostly with help from a candified cinnamon bun, who is indestructible by virtue of his fire shield, and from Ice King, who rescues them, and from PB, who manages one lucid moment. There's a beat in this arc where Patient Street. Pim, surveying the divided world she's created, admits to Finn that she regrets it. She did exactly what she set out to do, and it's not what she wanted. She's too sad, literally consumed by the Ice Elemental's emotional quality, to do anything about it. It's a small moment, but it says something useful about her. She's not a villain in the conventional sense. She's someone who wanted something badly, took drastic action to get it, and then had to live inside the consequences. The Ice Elemental always betrays, even when it's Patient St. Pim who doesn't want to. The reversal mechanism, when it finally arrives, is LSP, Lumpy Space Princess. She's been bumbling through this whole arc being only marginally useful. But lumps are the anti-element. They can't be converted by elemental purification, and their nature actively resists the elemental order. Her butt, specifically, is the focal point. Her lumpy energy fused with the gems and the Ice King's crown reverts the spell. Everything goes back to normal, mostly. A touch too much magic undoes itself in the process. Sweet Pea regrows his second horn, Jake goes through a brief physical transformation related to his Warren ampersand genetics, and 3 people wake up from their candy body prisons. Punchy the Punch Bowl, Manfred the Pinata, Crunchy the Cookie, Uncle Gumbald, Aunt Lolly, and Cousin Cheekle, free for the first time in 1,000 years. They retreat to a ziggurat. They have plans. The grass sword has been in Finn's life since he bought it from a grass wizard for $3. It was a bargain even then. It attached itself to his arm via a binding curse, a small squid-like entity that called itself home in his body. He's been wielding it for years, treating it as just his sword, not really registering that it's also in some sense a part of him. After the elemental arc, the Finn sword, the blue gem containing an iteration of Finn, is destroyed when the grass curse skewers it. The Finn inside the gem dies. The grass curse, now combined with the Finn sword's energy, forms something new. Fern, a grass version of Finn, built from the curse and the remnant of a previous self. He has all of Finn's memories. He sounds like Finn. He moves like Finn. He is, in every meaningful sense, also Finn. The identity crisis this creates for both of them is one of the more quietly effective things the later seasons do. Fern isn't a villain. He's a person who has no original self to fall back on, who exists entirely in reference to someone else's existence. Every good thing Finn does casts a shadow on Fern. Every accomplishment reminds Fern that he's the copy. He genuinely tries to build something of his own. He finds small moments of individuality, develops his own preferences, starts to feel like he might actually be someone distinct. And then the grief and the inadequacy get too loud, and he tries to kill Finn. He locks him in Gumbald's ziggurat, tries to make it look like an accident, shapeshifts fully into Finn's appearance. Finn saws himself out with his robot arm, cuts through Fern with the weed whip function, feels terrible about it. Fern survives. Gumbald finds him and reconstructs him as the Green Knight, a weapon to be deployed against the Candy Kingdom. Fern's grief is useful to someone with an agenda. It usually is. Separately, Finn is yanked to the vanishing point. That oath he made as a toddler, we'll live here and be best friends and spend every day together having adventures for all time. The phrase all time was heard by Chronologius Rex as a binding promise, and Finn's brief reluctance to hang out with Jake one afternoon was registered as a breach. He's about to be erased from history. Jake and PB round up everyone Finn has ever encountered, a truly remarkable cross-section of Oo's population, and use the last sleeping fire giant, powered by Baymo, to send Jake to the vanishing point. He proves he made the oath too, and that erasing Finn would break Jake's oath as well. They're released. On the way out, they tumble through time, seeing early Ooh, the Rainicorn Dog Wars, the construction of the Candy Kingdom, PB and Marceline in the early days of their relationship. Young Marceline gives them a time amulet they brought with them, told by a future version of themselves to give it back. The paradox closes on itself. They come home. A ship from Founders Island eventually detects Susan Strong's head implant. Still there, dormant for years, but traceable. They send a retrieval mission. Finn and company intercept the ship, destroy it, but Baymo swipes its navigation map before it goes down. Finn's people are out there. He's always known it intellectually, but now there's a map. He, Jake, Susan, and Baymo set sail. Susan wants to go back. Finn wants answers about his origin. Baymo, as it turns out, has his own quiet reasons, which become apparent once they're en route. The Guardian tries to stop them as they approach the island chain. It succeeds in separating the group, throwing each of them onto different parts of the archipelago. Finn and Jake wash up on a nearly uninhabited island with one occupant, Alva, a Swedish woman who escaped Founders Island years ago with a small group of others, built an artificial weather system to make the island livable, and outlived all her companions. She's been alone for a long time. She draws them a map and sends them on. The next island has humans, technically, but they're all voluntarily strapped into a virtual reality game, Better Reality Island, and they have no intention of leaving. Baymo, who interfaces with the game, becomes its supreme ruler and has to be persuaded to come back out. They essentially leave the VR humans to their choices, which is either respecting autonomy or giving up, depending on your frame. Hub Island is where Susan gets her memory back. Dr. Gross's disease forced everyone off years ago, and the island is abandoned. But Susan walks around what was clearly a home and something opens up. Her implant goes dark. She remembers her name, Kara Strong, Seeker, XJ77. She remembers Frida and the boat she destroyed, and all of it. Founders Island itself is the largest. The Minerva bots run things now. Minerva Campbell's consciousness uploaded into a network of helpful robot clones after the disease killed most of the population. The original Minerva, in the central server, is still herself. The clones are only functional, not personal. Finn finds her. She threatens to upload everyone's consciousness when she thinks the outside world might take him away from her. Finn argues that the outside world produced someone like him, good, capable, whole, and that the isolation hasn't protected anyone as thoroughly as she thinks. It's not the strongest argument, to be honest. Finn is, after all, the literal reincarnation of the embodiment of good. He was going to turn out fine, regardless of his environment. But Minerva hears something in it anyway, and relents. She opens the option to leave. Nobody takes it, except Frida, who Susan finds, and with whom Susan reconciles about the boat. The Guardian is deactivated.
Susan and Frida leave separately on their own adventure, and are not really seen again. They sail home on the original freighter from Marceline's era, the one two-bred Tom piloted all those centuries ago when the humans first fled the mainland. The show notes this without making a fuss of it. There's a nice melancholy to the human island arc overall. Finn has spent years wondering about his origins, about who his people were, and why he ended up alone in Ooo. The answer turns out to be, his father was a con man running from his own bad choices, his mother is a consciousness distributed across robot clones on an island thousands of miles away, and the community he came from is a functioning society that decided safety was more important than the outside world, and has never fully reconsidered that choice. It doesn't resolve into something clean. His mother loves him and would obliterate their entire civilization to protect him. His father loved him and left. Most of the humans are fine without him. He has to be okay with that. He is, mostly. He's always been better at accepting the world as it is than worrying about how it should have been. That's probably the catalyst comet in him, the embodiment of good just inherently oriented toward what's present rather than what's lost. Or maybe it's just that he had a good childhood despite everything. Hard to say. Gumbald, Lolly, and Cheekle had 1,000 years of being candy people to think about what they wanted to do when they got out. Gumbald built Gumbaldia, a whole kingdom, an army, a coalition of everyone who's ever had reason to dislike Princess Bubblegum. The Legion of Candy Kingdom haters turns out to be quite a large group when you advertise properly. The roster includes Ricardio, Ash, Marceline's terrible ex, Peacemaster, who has genuinely legitimate grievances about Peppermint Butler, having turned his children into demons, the hitman Scorcher, who Ice King once accidentally hired, and who is apparently still interested in the original contract. Ice King is also there, with no understanding of why. Dozens of others. Finn and Jake attempt peace talks in Gumbaldia. Gumbald makes a show of accepting a truce, and then splashes them with dum-dum juice, the lobotomizing potion he created over 1,000 years ago, intending for them to bring it back to the Candy Kingdom and get it on PB. Some of it hits Chickley instead. He turns back into Crunchy before he can hide. When Finn and Jake return, PB works out what happened. It gets on Peppermint Butler, regressing him to a baby. The war begins.
The Candy Kingdom's side brings everyone who matters. Marceline, Lady Rainicorn, LSP, Flame Princess, Slime Princess, Huntress Wizard, Lemongrab, the Duke of Nuts, who last appeared in a Season 1 episode about stolen pudding and is very much welcome here. And the ancient psychic tandem War Elephant, who has apparently been out in the world developing a moral framework and has returned for this. Before the battle begins, the Nightmare Juice Flask that Nightmare Princess gave Finn months ago is smashed. Finn, Jake, PB, Gumbald, and Fern all enter a shared dream space. In it, PB and Gumbald genuinely see each other's full perspectives. Her paranoia and need for control, his wounded pride, and the 1,000 years of resentment simmering inside a punch bowl. They find some understanding.
Finn and Fern work through their problems with each other, which is also working through problems with themselves, because they're the same person having a conversation with their own grief. Jake, somehow, connects all of it. They fight their respective demons. They arrive together on a beach. The cosmic owl flies through the dream. That makes it a premonition, which means the grass curse, dying inside the dream, is real outside it too. Fern begins dying as they wake up. Gumbald trips over Lolly on his way out of the dream and spills his own dum-dum juice on himself. Punchy again, just like that. Lolly genuinely did want peace. She accepts it. Then Kingman arrives through a portal above the battlefield. Then Gulb follows. Betty's plan: use Gulb's power to undo the crown's curse on Simon. Gulb can reduce things to their essential forms, strip away what's been added, In theory, the Crown's wish, which is what the corruption is built on, could be reset. It does not go to plan.
Betty overloads Maya the Sky Witch, who she'd been working with. Maya wakes from her long coma, immediately explodes from the power surge, and the explosion sends Ice King and Betty inside Gulb. Inside him, Simon becomes himself again. Betty becomes sane. The Crown has a new wish in it. They have moments, not long. Simon and Betty say goodbye. Betty uses the wish to protect Simon at all costs. This fuses her with Gulb. She becomes Golbetti, a merged entity that calmly and peacefully removes itself from Ooo. The Crown falls out of the fading portal. Gunter, the compressed Orgalorg penguin, gets his flippers on it. He wishes to become the Ice King, the same wish Gunther made in the Dinosaur Age, and becomes the Ice Thing, a large, bearded bird dragon ice creature who will rule the Ice Kingdom for the next 1,000 years. Fern dies. His last act is to leave a seed in Finn's hand. The seed is planted. It grows into the treehouse. The treehouse is Fern, and before that was Shoko, and before that was whatever the tree already was. Things in Adventure Time have a way of cycling back into each other. The aftermath is warm and earned. PB and Marceline finally, officially together. The humans build Upton above Ooo. PB adopts a more hands-off approach to ruling and moves in with Marcy. Sweet Pea graduates school. Lemon Hope is at the celebration. His long journey has wound back around to this moment.
It's a good ending for the main series. Peppermint Butler has been regressed to a child by the Dum Dum Juice. He's small, pink and mint-flavoured, with no memory accessible of his decades as the Candy Kingdom's Dark Wizard advisor. But his adult self, before the juice hit, planted a curse on him, a sort of instruction manual for finding his way back to who he was. So now Baby Pep is being haunted by a curse that demands he restore himself. He shows up at Wizards, the wizard school built directly on top of Kokanthi's sealed tomb, claiming to be his own nephew. He gets sorted into the Skinks, the least prestigious wizarding house, which this show handles with much less ceremony than Harry Potter, and meets his bunkmate Cadbra. She's the niece of Abracadaniel, a mostly harmless wizard we've seen a few times over the years. Cadbra doesn't actually care about real magic. She loves prestidigitation, card tricks, sleight of hand, the kind of thing that would get you laughed out of most wizard circles. She's genuinely good at it. They become friends. The school has a problem. Most of its senior faculty are secretly members of the cult of Kokanthi, the same cult that operated Wizard City originally, before the leadership change that supposedly ended dark magic here. They never actually stopped. They've been waiting for Kokanthi's body, sealed beneath the school, to be useful again. Bufo is behind it. He's the coalition of tadpoles in a frog body that's appeared in earlier seasons, usually as a background antagonist in Wizard City stories. He's been a teacher here while secretly organizing the cult. They need a vessel powerful enough to harness the ichor leaking from Kokanthi's remains, a power source that could cause what they call the Second Age of Terror.
Their first candidate, a student named Sparda, dies. Not powerful enough. Baby Pep, poking around trying to understand the curse haunting him, finds evidence that Bufo is behind it. Bufo is revealed to have shed his frog body. The tadpoles are hiding separately now. Dr. Colonius, the charming and trusted teacher who'd been specifically building Pep's confidence all semester, reveals herself as the actual cult leader. They take Pep to the tomb.
And Cadbra, who'd been following him, gets captured too. Pep drinks the ichor. He becomes Pepperminty, an enormously powerful version of himself with very little control. He kills the entire cult with casual excess. He almost kills Cadbra. She snaps him back. He returns to himself. The power is still in him, but manageable. His record is cleared. He could take a rank upgrade and leave. He turns it down to stay in the Skinks with Cadbra. It's a small moment, but it's one of my favourite things in the specials. Someone genuinely powerful, choosing the ordinary, unremarkable friendship over the advancement. Simon's situation around this time is worth dwelling on. He's free of the crown. He should, by any reasonable accounting, be happy about this. He's not. He lives in Upton as a kind of living exhibit. The 20th century man, a curiosity to the people of this new world who have no real context for what he represents. He does lectures, he signs autographs. His Fionna and Cake fanfiction became a bestseller while he was the Ice King, and now the entire literary industry
wants him at events to promote work he doesn't recognize as his own and finds somewhat embarrassing. He's rude to his fans, including a small girl named Astrid, who just wants his autograph and is clearly inspired by his work. Finn tries to cheer him up. It doesn't really help. Simon starts doing demon rituals, which is the Adventure Time equivalent of someone stress baking at 3 in the morning. He's looking for a way to reach Betty. He hasn't accepted that she's gone. Fionna and Cake started as Ice King's supposed fan fiction, broadcast across Ooo through his delusion. What the show eventually reveals, and commits to fully in its own series, is that they were always real. Prismo created their dimension as a creative project, an illegal one, strictly speaking. To hide it from auditors like Scarab, he beamed the whole thing into the Ice King's head.
Ice King believed they were real because they were real. He just didn't know where. When Simon regained himself and lost the crown's magic, the Fionna and Cake world lost its magic too. Gary, formerly Prince Gumball, became a normal human. Marshall Lee, formerly half-demon Marshall Lee, became just another half-human. Lumpy Space Prince became Ellis P., an ordinary man. They have no memory of the magical world. As far as they're concerned, this is all there ever was. Simon, performing one of his demon rituals, looking for a way to summon Golb, accidentally opens a portal. Cake, in the non-magical world, an ordinary cat, jumps through it to cool down because she had a fever. She ends up in Ooo. When Fionna starts looking for her missing cat, she finds a different portal from one of Simon's subsequent attempts. She jumps through, and now Scarab, the cosmic auditor, gets notified of a crossover. Prismo zaps them all to the time room, quickly transforms Fionna and Cake back into their magical selves so they can survive across dimensions, and tries to explain their situation. Scarab arrives. Prismo faces him, gets reduced to a small cube, and the trio escapes with Prismo's interdimensional remote into the multiverse. The dimensions they pass through are each their own kind of strange mirror. Farm World, where they find Farm World Finn's family. 5 kids, 2 named Jay and Bonnie, echoing Finn's Pillow World children from years earlier. A world where the roles of PB and the Ice King are reversed. The Winter King rules with deliberate cruelty, unlike the Ice King, who couldn't help it, having cursed PB and turned her candy people into awful mutants. Fionna removes his ice powers, which frees PB, but also thaws out Scarab, and they have to run again. A baby dimension. And then the Vampire King's world, where Simon was killed by vampires and never became Ice King, and Marceline, called the Star, was raised by the Vampire King instead. This world's Marceline is not especially good. Things go very badly there. They lose their last remote jump escaping.
They land in the world created by the Lich's original wish, the extermination dimension where all life is bone. Except Baymo is there, alone, calling the slowly decaying Lich Jerry, having apparently decided to treat companionship wherever it exists. This world is so bleak that even Baymo eventually dies in it, which is genuinely upsetting. Baymo dying ought not to be possible, and yet, here we are. The Lich is still technically alive here, just decomposing and sad. He's completed his goals, everything died, and found that the accomplishment of your central purpose doesn't necessarily make you feel better. Golbetty arrives. She takes in the situation. The Lich gets reduced to a cube. Scarab is disassembled into beetles that crawl into Simon's head to chase Fionna and Cake back into their world. Simon, with Golbetty's help, has his mind briefly placed into the body of a child who won't be born for 1,000 years, a child called Shermie, and then returned to himself. Fionna and Cake are back in their world. Scarab follows through Simon's head. The Fionna group fights the beetles as they reassemble back into Scarab. He tears their world apart. Then Golbetty gives Simon one last gift. She externalizes Fionna's world, pulls it out of Simon's mind as a dandelion seed, and gives it to Fionna. Fionna uses it to wish her world real. It becomes a genuine dimension in the multiverse. No longer illegal, no longer hidden. Scarab's entire purpose evaporates. He becomes the Time Room's janitor. Gary and Marshall don't revert to their magical forms. Fionna chose that. The current lives they're living, including the relationship they've tentatively started, are worth more than restoring a world they don't remember. It's one of the better choices the show makes. Their world is real and human and theirs. It can grow into whatever it becomes. Simon, back in Upton, finally reads a book called Casper and Nova, a children's book that a little girl wrote, inspired by his work that he'd been ignoring out of stubborn pride. He lets himself be moved by it. He's ready to be okay. That's the best the show can promise him, and it's enough. A millennium has passed since the Gum War. Most of the people we've spent this whole video with are gone. PB and Marceline's fate isn't confirmed. They might still be around, given that PB is a candy elemental and Marceline is immortal, but neither appears in the far future sections. The Candy Kingdom is enormous now and fully abandoned, its grand prize ball, Gumball Guardians, wandering the empty halls. The Ice Thing, the Gunter-turned-Ice King, still rules the Ice Kingdom, looking considerably more monstrous than it did 1,000 years ago. Patient St. Pim is still frozen somewhere in there. Sweet Pea is a warrior now. He carries Finn's Night Sword. The Lich is still technically in him, presumably, but Sweet Pea is Sweet Pea. He always has been. The dominant civilization in Ooo is the Pup Kingdom. This is the downstream consequence of Jake and Lady Rainicorn's relationship. Their mixed breed descendants aged fast, reproduced quickly, and over 1,000 years built an entire empire. Beth is their current descendant. She's pup number 38,000, which tells you how rapidly the species expanded. She's a renegade, living with her friend Shermie in Marceline's old cave, doing graffiti attacks on the Pup Kingdom. Shermie and Beth climb to the top of a mountain to visit Baymo. He lives there with an enormous collection of objects from throughout the show's history, Finn's old robot arm, things from adventures nobody alive remembers anymore. He sits them down and tells them stories. The Greyballs format from earlier in the show, Cuba presenting preserved moments from Oo's history, is essentially what Baymo is doing here, from a different angle. He's the keeper of this. He tells them about the Gum War. He tells them about Fern growing into the treehouse. They climb the tree afterward and pull the Finn sword from the branch where it's been waiting all this time. Whether this is significant, whether they're the next iteration of something. The show doesn't answer directly. It lets the possibility sit. Gibbon rules the Pup Kingdom, and not kindly. He's Jake's grandson through Charlie, and he's been alive for 1,000 years because he replaced one of his eyes with a gem from Evergreen's original crown, the same crown that started this whole story in the dinosaur age. That gem's power keeps him going. He also knows how to strip powers from other pups. Beth fled before he could take hers. Cuba is an alien who visits Earth with his sister Tuba, cataloguing history through Greyball pods. He accidentally kills someone at a space wedding, lands on Earth, ends up inside a prize ball guardian looking for an escape. He uses the Greyballs themselves to help, including one about Finn and Jake that contains information about a materializing wand buried near the treehouse. He digs it up, uses it, gets back to his ship, and leaves. His function in the show is partly narrative framing, partly a way of reminding the audience that Oo's stories are valuable enough that someone from another world thought them worth preserving. Shermie and Beth's dynamic is quieter than Finn and Jake's. They're explorers rather than heroes, adventurers without a specific mission. The show doesn't give them a defined purpose. They just are, two people living in the tail end of a very long story, finding pieces of it and wondering what they meant. And somewhere in Shermie's history, placed there 1,000 years ago by Golbetti, is a small piece of Simon Petrikov's consciousness. He's been in there the whole time, sleeping quietly in a life that isn't his, until he woke up briefly and understood, finally, what Betty gave him. Jake dies first. Dogs age faster than humans, and Jake never fully escaped that timeline. Somewhere in the decade or so after the Gum War, he dies. Finn gets a tattoo across his chest to memorialize him. He keeps adventuring. He trains Bronwyn, Kim Kil-Wan's daughter, the skater grandchild. He apparently also does something useful with TV at some point. He grows old in the specific way that people who've spent their lives doing physical things grow old, worn but not broken. He looks about 50 at 29, honestly. But he's had a full life. Then Finn dies. Of what, or exactly when, the show doesn't say. He enters the land of the dead. Death's son, the angsty punk child of Death and Life, who became New Death after killing his father, has been making a mess of things. He's been influenced by the Lich's hand, which is still out there in its multiplied form across dimensions. Under that influence, he's been systematically destroying the dead worlds, stopping life's kiln from turning, preventing reincarnation. Souls have nowhere to go. The afterlife is collapsing. Finn moves through the remaining dead worlds on his way to find Jake. He sees his parents, Minerva and Martin. Though what form they take here, what peace they've found, the show leaves impressionistic. He sees Jermaine, he moves forward.
New Death destroys the worlds as Finn moves through them. Mr. Fox is here, the consistently calm fox we've seen a handful of times across Ooo, who once tried to eat Jake and once fell in love with a duck named Bubaina, and who always had a kind of philosophical ease about him. He's been acting as Death's butler, bringing New Death extraordinary amounts of energy drinks. He leads Finn toward the end. Jake is in the 50th dead world, the most enlightened one, and there he doesn't know who Finn is anymore. Being in the 50th means you fully let go of your previous life, your attachments, everything. He's at peace in a way that has dissolved personal memory. Finn, characteristically, snaps him back anyway, because that's who Finn is. Even in the afterlife, even when the healthy thing might be to let go, he can't leave Jake in a state that doesn't have room for him, with all the dead worlds destroyed and every soul cascading into the first one. Something has to be done about New Death. Peppermint Butler, now fully grown again, a dark wizard, running the Candy Kingdom in the far future, is contacted. He sends them to New Death's mother, Life, in exchange for Finn's bones, which he already had. That's Pep Butt for you. Life gives them the kiss of death, a weapon her son can't avoid. Tiffany is here too, now an angel, and reveals himself in his final redemptive act. He saves Joshua, Margaret, and Jermaine, pulls them out of the collapsing dead worlds, and helps Finn and Jake reach New Death. They stake him, but whoever kills New Death becomes the New Death. Neither Finn nor Jake wants it. They hesitate too long. Mr. Fox does it accidentally. He becomes the New Death. I genuinely cannot think of a better outcome. A naturally philosophical, deeply calm, slightly dangerous creature who's been in and out of Oo's stories for a decade, elevated to cosmic responsibility by accident. It's exactly right. Life restarts her kiln. The dead worlds are rebuilt. Everything proceeds as it should. Joshua, Margaret, and Jermaine are alive in the dead worlds, properly situated now, and they're apparently going to raise Tiffany to be a better person in the afterlife, which is a strange but fitting final arrangement for that group. There's something about Mr. Fox becoming the New Death that I think is exactly right, though I couldn't have predicted it coming. He appears throughout the show's run as this peripheral figure, chill, curious, occasionally trying to eat Jake, once profoundly in love with a duck. He's never had an agenda, he's never been building toward anything. He just moves through the world at his own pace and takes what comes. Death in the Adventure Time framework is supposed to be neutral, a function rather than a force, someone who moves souls through rather than judging them. Mr. Fox, who has never seemed to care very much about status or outcome or winning, is possibly better suited for that than anyone who actively wanted the role.
Finn and Jake choose reincarnation. They'll come back as something new in some form and keep going. The catalyst comet that's always been somewhere in Finn can't really die. It just changes shape, changes purpose, cycles forward. Maybe they always end up together somehow, in some configuration, across the lives that follow. The show doesn't promise that, it just leaves the door open. And somewhere in the time room, an old man is still asleep, still dreaming of pickles. Prismo endures. Right, that's the story. From the pre-nothingness, monsters deciding to create existence, through Dinosaur Age, crown mishaps, and the slow horror of the Mushroom War, through 1,000 years of two survivors keeping each other alive in a broken world, through Candy Kingdoms and Fire Kingdoms and Vampire Courts and Catalyst Comets reincarnating through butterflies and blue goop and one-armed boys, through the Time Room and Farm World, and Golbetti and a dimension that lived inside a sad man's head until someone brave enough gave it a real sky to stand under. 297 episodes across 3 shows, plus however many comics you want to count as canon and the video games, and the crossover appearances, and the Grable collections.
It's a lot, and the remarkable thing is that it mostly holds together. There are contradictions and retcons and moments where you can tell the writers were building the mythology in real time without a complete map, but the emotional core, Simon and Marceline, PB and Marcy, Finn becoming who he's meant to be, Jake being imperfectly wonderful, the strange deep sadness of the Ice King, and the equally strange hope of Sweet Pea, all of that holds. If I had to say what the show is about, underneath all the lore, I'd say it's about the things we carry and the things we lose, and the fact that time keeps moving regardless. Simon carries the crown and what it costs him. Marceline carries Hambo and 1,000 years of people who left. Finn carries the grass sword curse and a father he barely knows, and eventually a flower where his arm used to be. The show is full of things being transformed, things being lost and found and lost again, and people making do with whatever version of themselves they end up as. There's a lot more I could cover. I've got a video planned about the Distant Lands specials in more depth, particularly the BMO one set on the space station and the Obsidian one that goes further into PB and Marceline's history. The comics have some genuinely wild corners I've only touched on here, and whenever the second season of Fionna and Cake arrives, I'll cover that properly too. For now though, that's enough for one night. Or enough to sleep too, which was sort of the whole point. Good night.